I never got hit by that wave of death or of grief of afterwards. Certainly missed her. Certainly, you know, I talked to her and all of those things afterwards. After several months, I was thinking, am I just in denial? Have I just stuffed it all? Because you know, I'm really fine, and I have never been not fine after the death.
Welcome, Richard Adamson, to the MAPS Canada podcast. So perhaps Richard is like many of the viewers out there. He's not a therapist or a health practitioner, and for most of his life, personal growth, spirituality, and ritual took a backseat. But spoiler alert, there's nothing like crisis to bring that back. A few years ago, Richard's wife of 30 years faced a health crisis that proved fatal. And that journey resulted in profound changes to his priorities and taught him the potential role that psychedelics can play in preparation for death and a healthy grief process for those continuing onward. Welcome, Richard.
Hi, Luke. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, some people have said, and some psychologists have said, that fear of death is a core driver of everything that we do. And people have commented that understanding, navigating, facing death is something that apparently we aren't very good at or adept at or do a lot of in the West. So I'm really happy to be having this conversation with you today, and thank you for being willing to share your story. I'd love if we could start with, if you'd like to share your story with the audience.
Yeah, sure. I'm at times I'm going to wander into, let's just call it the mystery, because there are aspects that are kind of not exactly hardcore science that have to do with the experiences involved. But so I'm always a little cautious about having people take literally things that I say as being hard truth. Their experiences inside sometimes an altered state. But so Grace and I were together for 33 years before she died, and when I first met her, she was among other things, a breathwork practitioner, and she'd had intensive training in Australia in holotropic breathwork, which was developed by Stan Groff. When LSD was made illegal, he'd been researching LSD for decades in Czechoslovakia and the University of Maryland and various places, and then suddenly somebody took away his main research tool, and he found that controlled breath processes could get you into altered states of consciousness, and developed this holotropic breathwork. Anyway, so this was 33 years ago that we did some work in that space. So we were very interested, did a bunch of work there early on. The life gets in the way, and you have to earn a living, and so my interests in those things kind of took a back seat while we moved on with our lives. And when Grace was diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer back in 2017, we had a lot of kind of heart-to-heart conversations about things. And one of the things she said is she had always wanted to try LSD, and so we went about trying to acquire some, and we did that, and that was fine. It was it was a very mind-opening experience for me. It was an interesting experience for her. She wasn't profoundly impressed by it, but she kept reading and found out about a group called Myco Meditations that was running psilocybin retreats in Jamaica, and she thought facilitated retreat would be something that she would like to attend. And we talked about it. It took us a couple of years to get there. And the two of us went. Me primarily, I thought I was going there to support her. And instead had an absolutely mind-opening experience of tremendous importance. So Grace was already a very spiritual person, and very well integrated in herself. She understood herself quite well, and wasn't extremely anxious. So when I talk about this experience of death and dying and the influence of psilocybin on both of us through that process, I don't pretend that this is a universal experience or that this is the way anybody else is likely to experience things. Everybody is completely individual, and they're going to have their own experience. But she wanted to, she didn't want to go into death afraid, and she didn't have a lot of fear early on, but she was still anxious about it and concerned. And that was a big focus on the journeys that we undertook in Jamaica. So for those of you not familiar with the MICO protocol, over a period of a week, there's 3 doses of psilocybin, generally of increasing intensity. They use very high doses, by up to 12 grams, maybe higher. So very high, intense experiences. So both of us came away with very, very profound experiences that were ineffable in some ways. The way my mind translated it was encounters with gods and goddesses, and one tremendously dark journey that basically put me in face to face with the heartlessness of the universe. It was this profoundly, this perception that the universe is essentially puts beauty before us in order to try and trick us into believing that there's a reason to live. But in fact, it's all just a joke. It was a really, really difficult, hard journey for me. And without going into tremendous detail, the recovery from that involved integration of some of my experiences from the earlier journeys with the gods and goddesses, specifically the goddess, when I encountered the ocean and found the taste of the ocean to immediately bring me into contact with the sweat of the goddess. It snapped me back into life affirming stance again. It was a profound experience. But and that's important because later on, that was the last long journey Grace was able to make. Long physical journey that Grace was able to make down to Jamaica. And over the course of the next 14 months, she continued to decline. And eventually was getting ready to die. She thought she was going to die in a hospice, but chose to die at home. Primarily because of the terrific palliative care nursing staff that we had. But one of the things that really struck me was during the final weeks of her decline, there was only myself and the one palliative care nurse at a time, and either my daughter or a close friend around for the last almost a month. And she moved into this state where she would close her eyes, and someone would say, well, she's just sleeping. Yeah, she might have been, but what it felt like was she was dancing on the edge of between one reality and the other. So she would drift away, and then she would come back, and she would look at her hands and sort of flex her fingers, and it was like absolute amazement and awe at this idea of being an embodied human being. Or she couldn't swallow, so give her a tiny taste of a sorbet, a really very flavorful fruit sorbet, and she would be in absolute ecstasy while she absorbed as much of the experience as she possibly could. And then she'd have to spit it out again. She couldn't swallow. But she would do this drifting in and out, and when she was back, she was completely engaged in the wonder of being physically embodied. And then she would just drift away, and she was constantly, they managed to get the pain control just right, so that her biggest fear was she didn't want to get buried in morphine and then just disappear. She wanted to be present for her death. And so she had this wonderful period of weeks of this, like she would drift off and she would come up and raise her fists and say blue. I have no idea what her experience had just been. But then I'd go and find her favorite painting and put it in front of her, and she spent an hour or two just immersed in absorbing this image. So there's this period where she was drifting back and forth, what I consider back and forth across the line. I don't know her internal experience, but that was mine. She was very peaceful and very at ease with it, didn't feel like she was fighting. And then when the end finally came, she just stopped breathing. We then carried her body downstairs, and she had seen a video of a female Buddhist nun with her head shaved, and she said, I like that, I want to shave my head. So we laid her out and shaved her head and washed her and oiled her and applied her favorite perfume and dressed her. And that too was part of a ritual for us. It was I think our culture outsources death and dying way too much. It's such a profoundly important aspect of living. It's like by the time I'd finished that ritual, I was so aware that this body was not Grace. This body was Grace's, the vehicle she chose to use for a period of time, but not her. And it really, that ritual part also allowed me to kind of in an embodied way have a feel for the transition completion. The idea of having somebody else deal with all of those things, I think would have left much more residual stuff for me to deal with afterwards. So anyway, that was the that gets us to the transition. What struck me afterwards, though, also in that run up to the transition, during that period between, both of us had come in our various ways through that first set of journeys in Jamaica, to the conclusion that part of my journey, we had been a couple for so long that there were many, many aspects of, you might call it the feminine or right brain, or aspects of life that I had delegated to her while I focused on being an engineer and managing businesses and doing stuff, that the doing stuff over here. I kind of delegated all of that and let Grace carry that for me. And that period, I started to realize I had to reintegrate that. I had to start learning to take care of relationships with family and caring and nurturing for family relationships, opening more aspects of myself to the right brain, making more of a priority of being present to nature, and so all of these things related to the journeys in Jamaica, but they also related to preparation for having to live not as part of this couple that I'd been for 33 years. So the transition afterwards became more and more of a conscious focus on integrating those aspects and pulling myself together on the way out.
Got it. I have a question for you,
yeah.
Richard.
Yeah, sure.
How I'm curious, and thank you for sharing in so much detail. It's a beautiful story, and I feel exactly as you say, we outsource a lot of what we do, and sometimes we outsource things that could be incredibly meaningful or incredibly revelatory, or just important for us to be present to and to attend to. And death and dying is one of those. In the lead up in the dying process, you mentioned that you went to Jamaica for psilocybin journeys, 3 in a week. What was the journey like? How did the journey for you and for your wife at the time? How did it prepare each of you, for her eventual passing?
Hey, we hope you're enjoying the podcast so far. Now, if you want to support and become part of the psychedelic movement, feel free to donate to MAPS Canada at the link in the description below. Thank you for helping our mission to support equitable access to legal and regulated psychedelic medicines for all Canadians.
Well, Grace found it hard to explain what her experience was. She felt like it was really important. I know she felt it was really important. In that she had a sense that she'd had a taste of what's on the other side, or what comes next, or whatever. I don't think language butchers experience. So that doesn't do justice to it, but she came away feeling much more comfortable with the mystery of what she was going through, and so she didn't have nearly as much fear. Though certainly during the last couple of weeks, there was one occasion when she certainly confessed that she was afraid. I think it would be too much to ask to say that there would never be any fear. But she was able to face it and maintain that kind of generally very peaceful approach. So that I can't tell you what her experiences were. She wasn't able to articulate them, and that's fine. One of the things these journeys, and I've since done 2 more retreats down in Jamaica, and I'm very convinced of the tremendous therapeutic but also spiritual value of these journeys. The part you can actually talk about is the least important part. So anyway, so that's on hers. My journeys took the form of understand that each of them was several hours long, and were very intense and had many facets to them. But I tend to categorize them as the first being an encounter with a masculine God energy. Later, I put the label of Shiva on it, but I'm not sure. And I was never particularly focused on Hinduism previously, but the characteristics of the characteristics of my experience lend them to that. And the second being Shakti Parvati. At the time, I just called her the goddess because I couldn't understand. I didn't have a name for her. And then the third one was 1,000 years lying in a ditch for 1,000 years in Mordor was basically what the experience was. It was really dark, but the come down from it was the part where the deep sense of betrayal by the universe. To the point, like lying down on the grass, I can see a beautiful egret 20 feet away from me on the grass, and all I can think of is that this is just evidence of how evil the universe can be to put something like that in front of you, and pretend that there's actual substance behind it. And laying down and breathing out and trying to come up with a motivation for why to bother breathing in ever again. I mean, it was dark. But I realized afterwards that I had essentially pre-grieved Grace's death. I was all of the things that people deny the death for until afterwards, and then they get hit by all of this stuff that comes up, about how could the universe or God or whoever do this to me, and this betrayal and all of that goes into the grief process. I had the opportunity to do that before she was dead. And so I could then be present to her, 100% present to her, without being fearful myself in being present to the dying process. So I could be 100% with her. Which turned it from something really negative into a really beautiful honor to be able to be part of that. So a little emotional. So I got the deep grief process out of the way. And then I'm not dealing with my shit and can be present with hers through her process. So although I do believe that the psilocybin journey for her was really important and helpful in allowing her to feel peaceful going into her death, it was tremendously important for me to be able to support her through that process and then come out the other end And I never got hit by that wave of death or of grief of afterwards. Certainly missed her. Certainly, I talked to her and all of those things afterwards. After several months, I was thinking, am I just in denial? Have I just stuffed it all? Because I'm really fine, and I have never been not fine after the death. And so I booked myself in for another retreat to say, help me to find out whether my unconscious is just hiding from. I hide from myself very well, so let's help me find that out. And that's another story altogether. But
got it.
But
yeah, that's so funny to wonder if it's like just repressed and stuff down. You're like, hey, do I need to process this thing that happened, or have I pre-processed it, or did it not land in a way that normally does? And I think it speaks to how different your experience of life can be when you've done a lot of healing and a lot of inner work, and done so much inner work, as Stan Groff would say, you kind of pass through the biographical layer of the mind and go into the transpersonal layer of the mind and experiencing things beyond yourself, and see truths that aren't just about the particulars of your life, but are about death in general and the nature of the universe and who we are at our deepest level, that can change even extremely what can be extremely traumatic things like death into something else. I can reflect and relate to you, Richard. I had my own experience with my grandmother passing away. When growing up, I had a lot of fear of death, and a lot of fear of regretting not being present with, or having enough experience with, or really taking in family members before they pass, including my grandmother. And through inner work with psychedelics and meditation and other modalities, for whatever reason, there wasn't one particular journey where I confronted death, but very similar to what you said about the ability to be really present during her passing. We're all in the room with her right there, and present with it in the days and weeks leading up to it, where I could be really present with it, and it wasn't like my own stuff was getting in the way of that presence and really showing up. And because of in my experience, I wasn't so caught up in my own experience, I was able to bring some ritual, some prayer, some ritual into the experience for me. And for me, it felt like a beautiful experience and a connecting experience, as well as a sad experience. But it wasn't like an ontological shock about the nature of death, me getting caught up in my own stuff. How could this happen? Type experience.
Yeah. That I think death needs much more nuanced approach to thinking about it. Better PR, I think. The thing is that we all die, and our culture treats this as being something horrendous and terrible, and really death and birth are mirror images of each other, and they happen once, and we each have one shot at those, and that's and they should both be celebrated. I tend to think of anyway. Let's not go down that rabbit hole, but I do feel that there are aspects of what happens during, well, not really during the psychedelic journeys. Yes, during the psychedelic journeys, but during the integration process, more important than the journeys themselves, that readies us for life, in a way. Anyway.
Sure. I have the title of a paper I'd like to read that is funny in contrast to our conversation. Psilocybin produces substantial and sustained decreases in depression and anxiety in patients with life-threatening cancer. A randomized double-blind trial. That's from Roland Griffiths et al. Back in the day. Back in the day, as in 2016. And speaks to how people face it. Some people think that, the way that I've sort of thought about it is the worst possible anxieties are the things that are real and that you can't do anything about, something like death. And so the idea that you can confront that, and maybe that's not a totally accurate statement, but at least death anxiety is very strong.
Yeah, no, it certainly is. But I really think that what creates a lot of anxiety is that we don't have a map for, it's unknown and unknowable, and we don't have a map for what's coming. And it, in a sense, the psychedelic journey, Grace experienced it as being a glimpse sort of beyond the curtain, so that she had this real sense of peace and about that. It doesn't matter whether that's really what happens or not, or whether that's an objectively true image of what happens after death. The fact that we now have a map, we now have a model that our minds can wrap itself around and say, this is where it's going. It can create a sense of peace for us because we now have a map, we have a model of what we're heading into. So it isn't, inevitability doesn't create anxiety. Inevitability gives you certainty. The uncertainty, the complete unknowing, and not having any map or frame of reference for what comes next, I think is where a lot of the anxiety comes from. And more so when we've been given maps or frames of reference that are highly negative or scary, which certain religious traditions have a tendency to do, which actually unready us for death. So I think that's what's problematic is the lack of a map, or having a really negative map for what you are facing. So the psilocybin experience gives a very real, direct experience as present of something that your mind then accepts and builds a model for and says, all right, we can move forward. And that may be an absolutely accurate experience of life after death, or it might not. But it works.
Interesting. Got it. And when you say map, was there any particular aspects of Grace's experience that spoke to what she felt would be the experience after death, like
no,
union,
it was
oneness or something like that?
Well, it was so there were felt sense aspects of it that you could talk about, a sense of opening into love and there was an experience of connecting with people who had died previously, being part of that. But it was more what I got was this felt sense of love and peace and light that she had, which is all very trite, and this has been said 1,000 times before, but the words don't. It's the felt sense, direct experiencing, not the abstractions.
Got it. And so yeah, so when you say map, it sounds like, although we love the term map in Maps Canada, that
Well, no,
very much, yeah.
So what I'm saying is the felt sense, direct experiencing in the journey gives you an anchor point inside yourself. You're not a left brain anchor point, but a right brain experiential anchor point. And so your mind then has a reference point to say that's where we're going. That's where things are. We're going in that direction, and so it's no longer this scary dark black hole with I don't know, demons and whatever, whatever your belief system is, or purgatory or these other things. Those aren't. It's you've experienced it. There's some familiarity with. There's a sense of familiarity, or homecoming, if you want. It's not. You're not going into something that's unknown and dangerous. Rather, that you're going to some place that's familiar, that you've been before.
Got it. Incredible. That makes a lot of sense. I think it's interesting that there's a certain authority that lived experience has that just can sit inside of us, that doesn't need to be espoused in an eloquent academic paper necessarily. But what I can say is, for the left brain, to appease our left brains, which is part of ourselves, the left brain likes logic and likes pattern and higher level thinking. Anyone who's logically and in their mind being like, I don't know about this stuff, they can look up Life After Life by Raymond Moody on near-death experiences, which I believe Stan Groff mentions in his literature, where he speaks on near-death experiences. And it's interesting, I just wrote down what you mentioned, opening into love, connecting with people who had died, peace, light. A common pattern that people experience in near-death experiences, where they approach death, but they don't fully pass. They come back, either through traumatic experience or spontaneously or in an accident or during surgery, etc. What they experience is, in the pattern, is that many people experience encountering a being of light, which is love, or intense love, or pure love, and people also experiencing connecting with people who had passed before. So Richard, what you share about what Grace experienced sounds like it aligns with the literature on near-death experiences.
And which came first, the chicken or the egg? Grace was very familiar with that literature as well, so could that have influenced her experience? But as I say, it doesn't matter. It works.
Got it. And to clarify, when you say works, what do you mean by that?
I watched her go through the final stages of her life and embrace death as with peace and joy. And this was the very best death I've been with a number of people through their final hours, and this is by far the best death I've ever witnessed. And I can only hope that mine is as good. So it works in that it peeled away. I attribute it to the psilocybin experience in part. It peeled away the anxiety and the negative elements and the fears that could have contaminated this absolutely beautiful closing chapter for her. So I do think that it was really important. Is in somebody who has done none of that work and is totally absorbed in very negative frames of reference, and would one set of psilocybin journeys get them to that point? I doubt it. I don't know. I only have this one experience.
Got it. Yeah, I was gonna, my next question for you. So for people who want to pre-grieve, who hear that it's possible to have a good death and to face it more consciously, and be more present with it, in your experience, what would you recommend, or what might be?
I would absolutely recommend. So first off, the retreat process, and I only know the one group that I've dealt with, but the retreat process where it's a period of time away from wherever you normally live, with a team of really good professionals support. The MICO guys, men and women, are brilliant at what they do because they're very non-directive. Obviously, they each come with their own belief systems and things like that, but they really allow whoever comes to work within the framework that they bring with them, rather than trying to stuff them into a particular spiritual framework or a particular psychological framework or a frame of reference. They are very, they journey with, they aren't directive in any way. So I highly recommend that kind of an environment because it creates tremendous level of safety, and that deep level of safety and support is really, really important. So we're kind of getting into something that's an issue for me. I'm really concerned about the over-medicalization of psychedelics, because the medical profession tends to be extremely left brain, and 90% of the value I see in this is right brain processes that are about symbol and ritual and metaphor and things that can't be explained easily, mysteries. Medicine doesn't like mysteries, and the two don't mix really well. And there's a lot of really profound value to be had in the psychedelics, and the value is very, very high if supported appropriately, in terms of the integration process, in terms of people walking you through the hard parts, being with you to make it safe so that you can dive deep. I think there needs to be another class of there isn't language for it, but another class of the word professional moves us over to the left brain. Priests and priestesses come close, but they've got a lot of baggage in there. But there really ought to be another category of sacred journeyers, separate from the medical profession and separate from strictly religious practices, that can walk people through these hard transitions, these confrontations with themselves.
Got it. Totally. And to speak to the left brainness of the society that we find ourselves in, that when describing in Roland Griffiths and his team's groundbreaking paper in 2008, which spoke to mystical experiences, they didn't speak about mystical experiences. They spoke about, and I'll read the title here, mystical type experiences occasioned by psilocybin mediate the attribution of personal meaning and spiritual significance 14 months later. they have to say mystical type experience, because in the research context and in the medical context and our general context, people don't like the root word of mystical, mystery, and spiritual, the beyond. It's something that we have not fully come to terms with or re-embraced after, say, the decline of Christianity in the last few centuries. And speaking to priest and priestess are interesting words. I'm curious if this as a term, but also as a role that people are out there offering these services, but the death doula. Did you work with any death doulas or speak with any, or how did that not play into?
No, I did not. We certainly read about them and thought about them, but and that probably I don't know until I've met the individual involved. I wouldn't, all I can do is make assumptions which will be wrong for sure. So no, we chose not to bring a death doula in.
Got it. Awesome. So I'm curious
on the other hand, certainly one of the palliative care nurses, and they only came in at night, had a profound sense of presence. A Nepalese gentleman who was, let's just say his role was beyond simply nursing, though he didn't physically do anything other than what another nurse might do. His presence was important.
Interesting. Wow. Again, right brain. How someone shows up as opposed to the words that they say, or the actions they make. I'm curious for people who may be listening, who maybe have their own terminal diagnosis, or for all of us who will pass away one day. You mentioned ritual. What rituals did you have for Grace's passing, or maybe what rituals might you recommend others explore or consider for themselves or their loved ones?
Well, first off, I think if somebody else recommends the ritual to you, then throw it out and do the homework yourself, because what makes a ritual powerful is its meaning to you. So us carrying Grace's body downstairs, laying it out on the island in the kitchen, shaving the hair off of her head because she had connected that with this Buddhist goddess and really had that, and so this, or Buddhist priestess, and we did that, the washing of the body and the applying her favorite bath oil and perfume, and then dressing her and preparing all of that before we called the funeral home. All of that was a really, really important and powerful ritual. We made it up amongst ourselves. Grace wasn't involved, obviously, in making that up. It was myself and my daughter and our close friend who were involved in that and sort of touched on different parts of each step. The perfume was a perfume Grace always asked me to pick up when I was traveling abroad. I would bring it in from the duty-free shops for her from time to time, and so there were things that connected in the ritual that had to do personally with her and how they related, our memories of her and connections to her. So it was moments of closure and saying goodbye that were all built up out of pieces of our own memories and imagination. I would avoid a canned, prepackaged ritual. But that's just me.
Got it. It sounds like part of the post-death ritual was things that she had requested. So in a certain sense, for her, as she's passing, to know that her body will be treated a certain way after. And it sounds like a big part of the post-death ritual is also for you and the other people around to process the experience and to honor memory.
No, to clarify, she didn't actually request anything. She had a sense of connection to this woman with the shaved head. Our shaving her head, or my shaving her head, was an acknowledgement of that and a connection of kind of connecting her with that moment. It was more an acknowledgement of having heard her. And was it for her or was it for me? I don't know.
I see. Got it. It all kind of blends together.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. Okay. So we're getting near to the end. Richard, what else would you like to share with the audience about this experience you had, or maybe any comments on the medicalization of psychedelics, or on what people are listening with their life as they age, or as people around them approach passing?
I think the intentional use of psychedelics, that is with a clear intention, and I think it's a sacred process. It's a process that needs to be treated with great respect. But it isn't a medical process. It has its medical uses, absolutely. PTSD and all of those therapeutic uses of psychedelic assisted therapy, and the assisted therapy part is really important. The drugs don't do it by themselves, or the plant medicine doesn't do it by itself. And similarly, the set and setting, including the sense of safety and support through the integration process, are all really, really important. But it's really dangerous to allow them to be hijacked by the medical profession, who are trained to be so left brain focused, and there is so much value that a lot of whether they be shamans or others who maybe have less professional credentials, but have an intuitive sense of how to be present without intervening. I think there's a whole. It's important to have the right people around you to support you. So if you're going to do this type of stuff, I know there's all the legal considerations and all of that. If you're dying, does it really matter if you broke the law? But that's another conversation. The point really is, if dying or not dying, make sure that however you're working, it's with people you trust, that you have a feel for being supported in whatever your journey is, and not trying to fit in somebody else's box.
Got it. Thank you. Beautiful, beautiful words. And we need to say, do not do anything illegal.
I didn't.
perhaps we can
I didn't. I didn't advocate for it.
Oh, exactly, for sure.
Yeah.
As a preventative disclaimer, follow
Yeah.
the local laws and regulations in your district, country, region. And as we move towards the equitable legalization and decriminalization of psychedelic use, that we can't separate that from the broader war on drugs, and that means that it must be allowed for responsible adults, if they wish to choose to consume substances of any kinds, that they have the freedom to do so.
Yeah.
Whether the intentions are just for fun, for curiosity, or for deep inner work or exploration. So we'll caveat with that.
Okay.
And are there any final thoughts you wish to share with the audience?
No, the point. Responsible adults is absolutely right, especially on the brain development side of things. It definitely not something for people under, I would say, 25. I think is when the brain development side of things. This isn't a legal question. This is a matter of physiology. But no, I absolutely agree. The decriminalization process, when it's I keep cycling around. I'm absolutely excited by the decriminalization process. I understand that it's important, that framing it in terms of the therapeutic aspects is the best path forward for that. But we have to be careful when we're framing the legislation or whatever around that we don't wind up jamming it into a box that closes out what amounts to, let's call it psychospiritual or spiritual aspects of it that go beyond the strictly medical.
Totally. Yeah, that speaks to the nuances and the challenge of regulation, which we can put on the legalization side. And at the very least, we can decriminalize in the meantime. We're not actively punishing people for having these incredibly powerful, beautiful substances that, when taken with proper care, can be incredibly revelatory and beneficial for the user and for the community around them. And Paul Stamets says psilocybin users are less prone to crime, and so society with less crime too. And speaking of Paul Stamets, Olympia, where he lives in Washington State, has announced that psilocybin is to be put on the lowest priority list for the law enforcement of Olympia. So that we're taking small little steps forward in different parts of the world to do what's right with psilocybin and other psychedelic substances, psychedelic medicines. And we can look forward to, a world where people have more access to these experiences if they wish and they're the right fit for it and they've been screened and they're responsible adults, to be able to do something like you and Grace did as you move towards her passing, and how beneficial, or to whatever extent they played a role in her passing being beautiful, then that is incredible. So thank you, Richard, for being on the podcast, and this will be up sometime soon.
Okay, thank you, Luke.
I'm David Bronner, Cosmic Engagement Officer at Dr. Bronner's, board member of MAPS. Subscribe to MAPS Canada. Bam!